Today did not start well. So a lot of my talks when I go to places, I talk about using failure and that sort of stuff. And so I did not set my alarm last night because I always wake up at 5 a.m. And of course, I didn't. I woke up at 6, which is only an hour later, until I realized that the clock in my hotel room was off. It was an hour earlier, so it was actually 7 or like 7:15, and I had 8 o'clock meeting. So I started to rush, and then I couldn't get the iron to work, and I filled it with water, and it was spilling it on my pants. And I made it down to this meeting, and I barely avoided getting coffee spilled on me. And I was thinking about this idea of using failure and how all this stuff happened to me. And then I realized, hey, I'll just open the keynote with it. I'll use that bullshit to open my keynote. It's been used. All right, so around 12 or 13 years ago, I'm in my office at the Second City in Chicago. And it's a Friday afternoon, and I'm just finishing up my work. And my son, Nick, is upstairs finishing his first week of summer camp, improv summer camp at Second City. And this is what you need to know about Nick at that time. He was 8 years old. He was chubby. He had weird theater parents, so he's like a weird theater kid. And he got bullied at school. And this was a thing. So this week was great. He had the best time. And we get in the car, and we're leaving the Piper's Alley parking garage at Second City. And Nick says to me, "Dad, do you know what I love about improv classes?" And I go, "No, buddy. What do you love about improv classes?" He said, "In improv, if you're nice and funny, you're popular." And I took a moment, and I was like, wow, that's kind of the world I want to live in. If you're nice and you're funny, you're popular. So I started at Second City in 1988. My first gig was as a dishwasher. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. The back bar in those days at Second City was filled with alcoholics and sociopaths. I'm not making that up. It was a terrible job. But on stage was incredible, total magic. Bonnie Hunt, Mike Myers, Jane Lynch were all in the professional company. Chris Farley was in the touring company and constantly getting in trouble for breaking shit. And the cool thing about the job is that, and I don't know if you know this, how Second City is structured, it's 2 acts of scripted content and a 3rd act, late night, that's improvised. And I'd come out and watch these improv sets, and it felt like magic. And it didn't take me long to realize it wasn't magic at all, it was a practice. So I'm not gonna bury the lead. Improvisation is yoga for your social skills, okay? Improvisation is loud, noisy group mindfulness. Improvisation is practice in being unpracticed. So thinking about that, and it might be the first time you've heard that framing, it might not surprise you to learn that this work was created by a social worker doing children's games. So in the 20s and 30s, a woman named Viola Spolin working at the Hull House on Chicago's South Side, her job was to better assimilate the immigrant children coming into her care. So she created these improv games that allowed the children to come together and play and empathize and communicate. A lot of it was in silence, because the kids didn't always share language. Her son, Paul Sills, was studying at the University of Chicago. He loved these games. He taught them to his friends, Mike Nichols, Elaine May. They formed the first improvisational theater in America called the Compass Players in 1955. That morphs into the Second City in 1959. So I ended up producing Second City, running it in 1992. My first cast included Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, Amy Sedaris, I know. Very lucky. I hired Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Rachel Dratch, Horatio Sands, Keegan-Michael Key, Jason Sudeikis, the list goes on. I'm not a genius of casting. These people, are in front of us. We all would have been like, yeah, them, come on. Incredibly lucky. But the thing was, these talented people came in and they all studied improvisation. And so what I want to talk to you today, and we don't have a ton of time, but I'm going to talk to you about a couple principles of improvisation. I'm going to make you do some shit. I'm going to make you improvise a little bit. Don't be too scared. It's okay. We'll all end up alive. But one of the things that I want to connect it to is the work we're doing right now. So quick story before we jump in. I wrote the book Yes and in 2015 while I was still running Second City and doing all of my jobs, which was not a good idea. And I went out on book tour. And if any author tells you they don't do this, they're lying. When you go to different cities, you go to the bookstore to see if your book is there. So I would I would go into these towns and I'd be looking at the business section, and it's not like, you know, I'm a theater guy. This was my first sort of business book, so I didn't normally peruse the business books. And I kept finding books on negotiation, which talked about improv, but didn't go any deeper. And when I got back to Second City, and I was sort of like, man, I like this book tour stuff. I like talking to groups, and I shifted my position, and I started this sort of insights division. And I really didn't, you know, I was starting with a fresh slate. And one of my colleagues said, you know, well, you create things, you create shows, you build product, you build content. What would you do for our group? And I said, funny enough, I've been seeing these negotiation books. What if I found a negotiation professor and we did like an improv negotiation module? And he's like, great, go do it. So I went back to my office and I Googled Chicago academic negotiation, and the first 5 academics came up. I emailed them, all of them, and we're like, hey, would you like to meet? And 4 of them got back to me like within a day. 3 of them, like within 3 days, we had had coffee, and I'm like, this is killer. Like, they're all into it. They get it. They're excited about it. So about 2 weeks later, and I'm just about to close the deal with one of these academics, I get an email back from Eugene Caruso at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. And he's like, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. Do you still want to meet? Like, normally I'd be like, no, I'm good. But I'm trying to do this like Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes crap. And so I'm like, yeah, let's meet. So I go up to Hyde Park. It's so beautiful on that campus. And he says, I'm going to invite my wife, Heather. She also works here, and I think she'd be interested. So I go into their office, and I start doing my rap on improvisation, all the stuff you just heard. And Eugene's not even looking at me. He's looking at Heather. Heather's like looking at me intensely. And when I finish talking, she goes, Kelly, we're behavioral scientists, and we have decades and decades of research that shows us that people make bad choices for themselves. And you appear to have an art form and a practice that allows people to practice making different and better choices. Those 2 things have never been put together. And within a couple of months, we ended up announcing a collaboration between the Center for Decision Research at Chicago Booth and the Second City. It's called the Second Science Project. And what we do is we study behavioral science through the lens of improvisation. It's amazing. We literally have a lab where scholars and improvisers meet every week. Sometimes we're bringing the idea, sometimes they're bringing the idea. We create executive education programs. We do research in the classroom, because it's all about sort of human behavior. And one of the first things that we talked about that we know from our beginning improv classes is that we as human beings, especially as we become adults, we lack focus in listening. And turns out there's a lot of data to support this. So the first thing I want to do is lead us through a listening exercise. So you can pair up or be in 3s at your table. So that's what I need right now. So like 3, you're all good. If you want to turn around and go to another table, pick person A, person B, and person C if you're a 3. All right, so here's what you're going to do. Person A, you are going to start this conversation with person B and or C about a work problem that you've got. Just some issue that you're working on that you want to sort of discuss. Person B and person C, as you're in this conversation, and it's going to go for a minute or so, your first word that you're going to start with in your response needs to be the last word person A says. Okay? And that's how the conversation is going to go. You always have to start your sentence with the last word that the person who spoke it to you said. Everyone sort of understand that? Yeah, and no cheating in terms of like, blah, 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 octopus, go, octopus. I know what you're going to do. And there's like a dude out there gaming the system. No. Okay, person A, start, go. I want to hear back from you guys. So just shout out some words here. What was that like? Good? Okay, great. Awkward, I like that. Challenging. Fun. Focused, that's interesting. Unfocused, yes. Guys, we're talking about dyads. Everything is 2 things at least. A lot of people say, well, it breaks up the rhythm. I'm like, yeah, you know what it breaks up the rhythm? Of you not listening. We all do this. You know, like if we're having a normal conversation, right, and you're speaking a sentence to me, and my arm is the length of that sentence, when am I stopping to listen? Right about here, sometimes here. Right? But the problem is when you're improvising on stage in a scene at Second City, you can't stop listening because the last few words might have vital information that's going to be given to you for you to respond. How is that any different than what we're living in our lives? But we do. We stop listening because we want to formulate our answer, because we want to look good, and we're missing it. And by the way, that little pause at the end when someone is speaking to you and you take a moment to hear them and then talk back to them, that's powerful. They get it. They're heard. We have a huge focus issue. And we had it before the digital devices, but now it's like game over, right? So Adam Alter, who's at the Stern School of Business, he's got a great book called Irresistible. And he says that, this is a Microsoft study, that the average attention span in the year 2000 was 12 seconds. All right? By 2013, it's down to 7 seconds. A goldfish has an attention span of 8 seconds. We are 1 second less than goldfish. And at beginning improv classes, this is what we do. We do a lot of focus exercises, and we do a lot of things that you might consider mindfulness training, you know, counting bricks in a wall, doing sort of spacewalks, looking people in the eye, just sort of communicating as human being to human being. And we put the cell phones down, we put them away. There's studies that show that just having a cell phone out on the table between us, even if it's upside down, decreases our focus and attention to each other. What does it take what's the average seconds to open an email? Something like 6 or 7 seconds, right? How about instant messaging? We're constantly getting thrown off. We're getting thrown off, and we're not having these important conversations. And it's interesting talking to the behavioral scientists about this, is like what happens when that happens. And I love this story that Heather Caruso at the University of Chicago shared with me, and it's the two sisters in an orange story. Some of you might know this. That two sisters live in a house, and they meet in the kitchen, and they both reach for an orange. And they both want the orange. And so what do? They're sisters. They cut it in half and share it. So the next day, one of the sisters goes up and goes, hey, by the way, what did you want that orange for? And the other one goes, well, I was feeling kind of sick, and I wanted the pulp to make orange juice. Why? What did you want it for? I was just looking for the rind because I wanted to make a cake, and I needed the zest. They missed it. They both could have had everything they wanted. So not only are we not listening, but we're also not communicating. And this is hugely important because we miss out on sometimes the most important information. And we wildly overestimate our ability to perceive what's going on in a room, by the way. So Nick Epley is one of the scholars we work with at the University of Chicago. And the only joke I'm going to tell you today is his joke, because I don't normally tell jokes, but is in his book Mindwise, and it kind of sums up what I'm talking about, which is a man walks up to a riverbed, he sees another man across the way, and he yells to him, how do I get to the other side of the river? And the man yells back, you are on the other side of the river. I mean, that's how we're living. All right, but there's some nudges and some hacks for this, and I'm going to give you one. So my wife and I have both worked at Second City, she for like 32 years. It'll be 30 for me in October. And our kids grew up improvising. And like all children, they would argue in the car. And my wife would play an improv game with them to get them to stop. And the game is called One Word Story. So I give this to you for your parents out there. If they're being obnoxious in the car or fighting or whatever, you say, okay, we're going to tell a story one word at a time. So instantly it changes that focus, right? They're focused on the game of it. And the other thing it does, so my daughter Nora, she does a thing when she gets in conversation, it's not really a conversation, we call it a Noralogue, because it's a monologue. And she doesn't really know or didn't know how to share conversation. And when she started playing that game, she never wanted to be the person to say the or and. But it screws up the game when you don't do that. And when you gamify the situation and she wants to win, she starts saying the and the and over time that becomes kind of a practice. You know, so I'm going to talk in a second about yes and it's not so much about saying those words, but it's about the yes and mindset. Another hack on a technological level that we've seen, Daimler Chrysler does a thing. When you go on vacation and you work for Daimler Chrysler, your email is set up so that if someone emails you, the person who sent the email gets a response saying, this person is on vacation. If you need to contact someone, here's the other person to contact. So that email never shows up in your inbox. So if you're on vacation at Daimler Chrysler and you come back from vacation, your inbox is exactly how it was when you left. Right? Can you effing imagine? I was like, that is the best thing in the world, because we're constantly checking our, I was just in Hawaii. I was on my email every goddamn morning. Amazing. All right, let's talk about yes and. So I give these talks to lots of business groups, and I start talking about this idea around yes and. And invariably there's a dude, a guy in the back in a suit, who raises his hand and says, if I yes-anded every idea that came into my office, I'd get no work done. Two things I know about that guy. He is a nightmare to work with. And he's misunderstanding the concept because yes and operates at the front end of creativity. It works like this. If improvisation essentially is groups of people making something out of nothing, the way you can circumvent that, the way you can stop that, is by saying no. Stops it in its tracks. And you can't just say yes. You have to say yes and. You have to affirm and contribute in order to explore and heighten. That's improv. So yes and is 5 minutes at the beginning of a brainstorm. In the case of Second City, it's the first few weeks of rehearsal. You put up every idea that comes in, even the terrible ones. And the thing here, right, don't we know this from the history of business, is that what great inventions seemed like, oh yeah, we all get it. It was never the case. It's always the outlier idea. So let it in the room for a little bit. What's the big deal? And you can tear it down later. So I want us to try that. So stay in your groups that you had, the A, B, and C, and we're going to do a yes and exercise. So for this first round, person A is going to pitch. We're going to have a reunion. This thing went so well, we're all getting together. And you're going to pitch where we're going to have the reunion. So person A does that. Person B and or C, your job is to say no in as many ways as possible. You are going to shoot down this idea in poetic fashion. You are going to live in no. You, person A, keep pitching. You can switch to a new idea. You can keep trying to do your own idea. We're going to do this for a minute. Everyone got it? Go. I don't know who you are, but some woman back there has the best laugh ever. I adore your laugh. Okay, talk to me. What was that like? Shout out some words. Painful. What else? Hysterical. Normal. I get that a lot. Great practice. Too easy, yeah.
Business as usual.
Business as, yeah, right? How many times are you in that meeting when that's the first thing that comes out? Nope. And here's the thing. You know, we all say we want, like, good ideas, we want out-of-the-box thinking. When you say no to someone with their idea, and then you say no again, and then you say no again, how many ideas do you think this person's going to throw out? They're done. No more ideas. Wait for the other person. And then you get into all these biases, right? Confirmation bias and all this stuff, and you're not getting the best ideas. And it's not just about saying, you know, yes and. It is about a mindset towards allowing the idea to exist. But there's levels to this, right? It's not just about the no. Like the no you kind of get, and you're like, that guy's an asshole, fine, whatever. The insidious one is the next one. Okay, person B, you are going to pitch the reunion. Person A and person C, your job to respond is with these words, yes, but. So yes, but, and then wherever you want to take it. All right, another minute. Let's go. I'm very curious how that felt. Throw out some words, some adjectives. Challenging, entertaining, frustrating, defeating, kind of worse. Here's the deal, like the no is very straightforward. The yes, but is the no with a bow tie. You know, the little gratitude goes off and then the shiv comes in. So yes, but I find in my experience is how most people behave. The no is kind of like, you know that guy, everyone knows that guy in their office. I keep saying it's a guy, it is. I mean, 95% of the time, right? But the yes, but is kind of the default thing of like, yeah, all right, yeah, I get it. Let's do this other thing, you know, kind of thing. Yeah, well, it is. And it is the way that we are conditioned to respond. Our default system is to, frankly, do nothing. That's default. Default is do nothing. The next is to go into fear brain and be scared of it, especially if it's new or different. That's very common. That's just how us human beings are wired. And we've been talking the past couple days, I've been talking with a few different people, and I've never understood why in business we check our humanity at the door. What's that about? That's the only thing we've got. If we're going to change the robot narrative, it's going to be embracing the humanity that we have. And we are complicated beings. But we've got to use our creativity and our problem solving and our compassion and our suffering, we talked about that, when we walk into our business. Okay, third one. So this is the idea around yes and. So person A or C, you're going to pitch where we're going to have our reunion. And the job of everyone is to yes and every idea. Build upon the idea. I don't care how absurd or where it goes. Weirder, the better. Pretend we're in Austin. All right? So I'm going to give you about a minute, maybe a little bit more to yes and. Ready? Go. All right, how is that different? How is that different? Freer, more fun, creative. All right, I want to know, give me some of the, what are you guys doing? What did you decide on? All right, give me a little bit.
Everybody's going to different places.
Yep.
Whenever they want, and they're going to get the money from the TD Bank.
Whatever they want. Free money wherever you want to go. You're not even together.
No.
Love it. Actually, capital idea. What else? What did you guys come up with?
We're going to have our family reunion in a ghetto in Brooklyn and invite homeless people and kids. And Oprah's going to show up.
Oprah showing up. Oh, this is awesome. Purpose, social good. Good for you. I see the difference between these people. How about you guys?
We're going to Iceland for our CLO. We're going to do a Game of Thrones and themed bar. We're going to go figure out how to go to the lagoon therapeutically.
Love it. Iceland, Game of Thrones, drinking. Learning. Drinking and learning. How about you guys? Okay, Kansas City, barbecue, grandma and grandpa can't go there. Yeah, yes and is pretty awesome. It's incredible. All right, I told you that we do this work with the Center for Decision Research at Chicago booth. So one of our very first meetings with the scholars, so these are all like very, very smart people in this field, they're like, well, give us an example of one of your corporate exercises. And so I go, oh, like almost always we do the yes and exercise. And we described it just how we did it. And the first thing the scholars do is they say, well, you're doing it the wrong way. And we're like, what do you mean? And they're like, you're doing it backwards. It should be the other way. And I'm like, why? And they go, because of loss aversion. And I go, what is loss aversion? So in behavioral economics, many of you know this, they understand that people hate losing stuff more than they care about gaining stuff. So the idea was that if you start with yes and then work your way to no, it's going to be more impactful. So the next week, Mark Sutton, one of our teachers, actually did this in a corporate workshop. And we always start with yes and because it is about the sort of like mindset that we want to start with. And afterwards, I'm like, hey, how'd it go? And he goes, well, they were right in one way. By the time they got to no, they were pissed, like deeply pissed. They remained deeply pissed the rest of the workshop. So with all due respect to my scholar friends, for the performative aspect of yes and, we're keeping it the way it is. But in a far more interesting way, it stimulated this conversation, which is, yeah, we get it. We get the idea of a mindset to abundance, but you at Second City edit down. You say a lot of no when you're creating your work, and indeed, you know, the yes and process, we probably generate 180, 190 scenes to end up at like 16. So we have this whole process that does that. And so we're like, in the exercise, how do we create a sort of a fourth module that speaks to that process? And we came up with one, and we've been testing it out. And that one is called Thank You Because. All right, so this is important because it's hard to say no, and especially hard when you're in disagreement. And it's especially hard these days, let's say you're in ideological disagreement, right? We know the world we're living in. So what thank you because does is, let's say you are two people sitting across from each other and you completely believe different things. And this person is invited to share their belief. And you know you don't believe it. But you thank them for sharing it. So first off, that sets off the gratitude part of the brain. It's a good thing, just there. The because is the vital part. So your job then is to not only thank them, but then rephrase in your words what they just said to you. Like, I'm trying to understand, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying to me and why it's important. And what happens then is that person is heard. That person is seen. And then if their job is to do that to you, they're seeing and hearing you. This is how we stay inside a difficult conversation, which is something we're not doing right now, because we don't want to see or hear or admit, because we're so far apart. But Dan Gilbert, the psychologist from Harvard, says that if an alien came down to the Earth right now and met one person, he'd understand 90% of humanity. We share so much more than what our differences are, but we live in the 10% difference part. And we've taken this sort of thank you because thing. The first time we did it, I got Adam Grant as a friend who wrote the book Give and Take, and a friend of his was moving to Chicago, and her name is I-Jen Poo. So I-Jen runs a group called Caring Across Generations, as well as the National Domestic Workers Alliance. If you guys watch the Golden Globes, she was Meryl Streep's date. Pretty cool. So I-Jen and I met for a lunch. I didn't even know what her deal was. We just sort of met and we started talking about my work and her work. And she is really trying to change the conversation around aging, growing old, and also working with these immigrant populations that mostly make up the domestic workers. And so we decided we were going to combine our work, and we were going to work on a thing called Improvisation for Care. So we launched this at the Aspen Ideas Festival. And my wife, Anne, who works in the Second Science Project, came and led a workshop. And we did yes and then we did thank you because, but we asked people to share their caregiving story. When we did that, we were about a minute or two into it. And Anne's like, I don't want to stop the conversation. I'm like, don't stop the conversation. You know how the yes and goes like this? The volume gets bigger, you guys are laughing. This was everyone looking at each other. Some people were crying, everyone was sharing, and we came out of it, and I remember this doctor raised his hand, and he goes, I know that's how I'm supposed to listen, but I don't do it. And this is so vital right now, in a place where we're bombarded by, digital devices and social media, and we've got these political divides, and they're terrible, and I'm a lefty, I'm from Chicago, we all know what my politics are. But we're not seeing and hearing people, and they need to be. And one of the ideas in behavioral science that speaks to this is an idea called self-verification theory. And this is really important because I think most of us think we want to be seen as our best selves, our prettiest selves, our smartest selves. That's actually not true. We want to be seen as we see ourselves. So if I see myself as clumsy, it's important that you see me as clumsy so you don't throw me a ball. But I'm not going to tell you that, because I'm a human being and I'm putting up all this garbage in between there. But this is really important, because when you can see someone as they see themselves, they feel that, they understand that. And by the way, this also explains why some of us date assholes. Think about it. A couple yes and stories, just because you guys want some backstage stories, I imagine. My favorite yes and story from Second City started like this. This is like 6 years ago. There was a new person working in the box office, and they got a call from the concierge at the Four Seasons and said, I've got a celebrity who wants to come to the show. And this person said, well, our main stage show is sold out, but we'll put you in the ETC. Now, we have these two equity theaters. They're both great, but normally we have celebrities come, we figure out a way to get them into the main stage. Had we known that the opera diva Renee Fleming was coming, we wouldn't have put her in the show where we were illegally sampling her voice throughout the entire show. So Renee is there with her entire family, and later she's like, yeah, I turned to my husband, I'm like, I think that's me. No, that's definitely me. And she goes up to our musical director after the show, Jesse Case, who knew, he saw her in the audience, and he's like sweating like the guy in Airplane at this point. And Renee, her first words were, I'm not gonna sue you, I have an idea. And he's like, talk to Kelly. Here's his card, because they hold my cards. So the next day, I get a call from Renee Fleming, which is cool. And we go out for coffee. And Renee's like, I just got struck when I heard my voice and at this point, she's a consultant to Lyric Opera Chicago. And she's like, how can we combine? How can we get young people to go to the opera? And how do we do what you do and what we do and find a way to connect that? And I talked to her about our process. I go, here's the deal. Like, we have this rich process of yes and failing that's, you know, and it's small, and we're completely different. You're plotting out seasons 3 years in advance, and we're writing a show in 12 weeks. You know, we have 6 chairs, and you've got like an elephant backstage. Not kidding, for Tosca. And I said, if you allow us to layer our process into your world, you yes and this, I think we can do it. So we've got budget for a year, and we took that year to play and to attend master classes and to interview stagehands. I love the fact, I remember we interviewed the stage manager, it was after an opera, and she's like, did you notice the tenor never getting his light? Did you notice that? I mean, all these sort of you know, intricate fights that they've got between each other. And so it's starting to go well, and we're starting to find material. And we decide we're going to put up the show, The Second City Guide to the Opera, at the Civic Opera House. We'll do 2 shows. So we put the show on sale before we even know exactly who's doing it. We haven't completely written the show. It sells out. So much so that we have to cover the pit to put in more seats. Renee gets her friend Sir Patrick Stewart to co-host. And this is completely true. We were doing both shows on a Saturday night. The week leading up to it, I literally threw up every morning. Like, as much as I love this and I believe in it, the stakes I've never produced anything like this. It's like celebrity ridden. Everyone's talking about it in the city. In fact, a lot of the press is being snarky, like this is going to suck. Like, how could these things work? So Friday, and Renee and Patrick aren't coming in until Friday. So it's kind of Saturday Night Live-y in the sense that we've got scripts that we sent to them in advance that they semi-memorized. It was okay, we'd protect them. So they show up on Friday, and about half of our cast, the Second City cast, also does an improvised Shakespeare show. And so we decide we're going to do, as part of the show, a like 10-minute improvised Shakespeare play that we'll get a suggestion from the audience. And we asked Sir Patrick if he wanted to do it with us. And he said, okay, well, show it to me. So in the rehearsal room, we did it. His response and these guys are brilliant. His response afterwards was, you're mad, I'll do it. So the night of the show comes, and Carissa Barreca, who's in our cast, is the person who's going to go out into the audience to get the suggestion. And the heads of Lyric Opera are like, hey, look, Carissa, you can pick anyone except for this one row. It's like the 6th row. It's all the bankers, all the people who funded it, and we just don't want to take any chances. And of course, you see where this is going. So the moment comes we're supposed to improvise. Carissa goes to the 6th row, and she gets like the guy, Joe, the banker, who's funded all of this. And I'll note that this is like the economic crisis is going on right now, so things aren't good. But Joe's doing just great. He is like so tone deaf to everything. And he's like, no, business is great. Yeah, I don't care about poor people. It's fine. And like, it is not going well. The suggestion, the cast takes it. They improvise beautifully. Sir Patrick Stewart plays Joe the banker, and he is murdered in this scene. And it's a huge hit with everyone but Joe and his row. Now, we kind of saved it. Carissa went back out and like, Joe, you were the hero of the show. Look what you did. And he's like, oh, I guess I was the hero of the show. So that worked. But the really cool thing was late that night, everyone was gone. We're literally just drinking beers in the empty theater. And Patrick Stewart says, you know, I'm at a portion of my career where I don't get scared. I've done everything. And I was so frightened tonight, and it felt great. And so what Patrick Stewart has done since then is every year, about 3 or 4, or sometimes 5 times a year, he finds where the Shakespeare group is performing. Everyone is told they have to turn off their phones, put them away, and they introduce their friend Patrick, who's going to improvise with them for that night. And he just does it. And our guys, like, one of our people wrote the toast at his wedding, and it just created this sense of community. It's amazing. Do we have time for, yeah, we do. We have time for, I want to do one more game that will talk about leadership and some of the other stuff that we're done, but I need 4 volunteers. Will 4 people be brave enough to come up here? Raise your hand. 1, up, 2, up. Anyone else? Yep. Yep. I got you 4. Hey, this is impromptu. Hey, you guys, tech-wise, do we have a mic that I could have? Great. So you guys are going to get in the line right here. I hope you've been listening to the presentation and not being on your phone. Thank you for this. Sorry, it's last minute. All right, you hold this. Great. Okay, this, everybody, is Dr. Know-It-All. This is the smartest person in the world. And you can ask any question. You can ask about physics, about life, about politics. It doesn't matter. They will know the answer. And when they answer you, they answer 1 word at a time. Going this way and that way. And all they're doing, they're listening to each other and they're responding. But they are, I mean, like the brilliance is off those scales. All right, so I'm going to ask the first question, all right? Dr. Know-It-All, have you enjoyed the conference so far?
I have
Not
spent
a
moment thinking about
learning.
Yeah, okay. So what Dr. Know-It-All is saying is, I'm not thinking about it because I'm absorbing everything that's being said. I will process later. But my job is to pay attention to other people right now. Jesus, you're smart. Oh my God. Okay, out here, who's got a question for Dr. Know-It-All? It can be on anything. Shout it out. Oh, come on. Describe black hole theory. Yeah.
black
Whole.
theory is one
Of
the
ways
humans consider alternate
universes?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, they got to dumb it down, right? I mean, like, people aren't going to get it. So I think the gist of it we get is the way we consider the alternative universes. Very good question, of course. This response is killer. What else we got?
Will robots control the world?
Will robots control the world?
robots
Won't.
control
My
wife.
Because
She
can't.
do anything.
All right. We'll forgive the misogyny. They know their relationship. It's cool. It is cool. Let's go with one more question. Yep. How did Trump get into power?
One of
His
scariest
moments
was
when
he
couldn't
convince
anyone
that
he
didn't
like
politics.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. You know he didn't want to be president. He just couldn't convince anyone. Dr. Know-It-All, thank you. Awesome. Great job. So, first of all, they were great, right? I mean, they all listened to each other. These guys had never performed before. And I don't mean to focus on me, but what was I doing? What was I doing during that? I was listening. What else was I doing? Yes-anding. What else? Guiding the conversation. I made everything they said right. All right? And this is a thing we know about learners. For beginning learners, they just need affirmation. That's all they need. They're going to screw up. They're going to fail. Support them. Support them. When they become advanced, when you're on the Second City main stage, you challenge them. A whole bunch of junk in between that I don't know about. But that's what I know, because that's what I deal with. I deal with experts on the stage, and I deal with the beginners who come into the classes. And for these guys, if you just frame it for them, frame how they're correct, it's an amazing moment. And they get to shine, and they get to be stars. And this is the thing about the work at Second City, is it is failure positive. One of my favorite phrases that a teacher named Rick Thomas has is that you need to learn to fall into the crack in the game. You need to learn to fall into the crack in the game. And the idea there is if I'm improvising on stage and I've identified myself clearly as Bruce, but the person across from me calls me John, you know, I can get a cheap laugh by calling him out on it, but it's much better when I say something like, how'd you know my secret identity? Because he knows I've saved him, the audience knows I've saved him, plus we have this whole secret identity thing to play with now. That's what that is. We talk about work as bringing a brick, not a cathedral. Too many of us walk into our conversations with a cathedral fully built, when really your job is just to bring a brick. Someone else to bring a brick, and you see what happens. And that's uncomfortable. That's not something that we are normally feeling sort of great about. And the idea in leadership, which is my point with these guys, is as a leader, my job is to make my group shine. You know, we have a phrase in our work that you have to make your partner look good. That's your job. You push your others focused completely. And that's vitally important. One of the people who's really, really good at that is Tina Fey. So in the 90s, when Tina was on stage at Second City Chicago, she was not the most famous or popular actress. Actually, we had someone on stage. Normally at Second City, like, you don't notice the individual people until, you know, like, they become famous. But every once in a while, like a Chris Farley comes along and people know and they're like, you gotta come see that guy. So there was someone in the cast with Tina who was hugely popular in Chicago. People came to see her. Any guesses? It wasn't Amy. It was Rachel Dratch, less known. So Rachel was destined for, like, we're like, that's the next superstar. We're just seeing it. But she kept not getting hired. And she actually got flown out to Saturday Night Live and didn't get hired. And basically the rule with that is once you've auditioned and not been hired, you're not getting a second chance. It's happened like once or twice, that's it. And Tina had been hired as a writer. And then the next year she got hired as head writer and then did Weekend Update. And she knows that they're not going to come back and look at Rachel. And Rachel was already off the Second City main stage and was really upset about where her career was going to go. So Tina calls me and says, hey, the summer's coming up. Could we have a couple nights in the ETC stage? It's Dark Tuesday, Wednesday, and I want to put together a two-woman show with Rachel. And I'm like, yeah, of course, that'd be great. And so they start developing the show. And there's like a really crude tape online, like YouTube, about Dratch and Fey. I recommend, like, it is brilliant. It is so good. And what Tina was calculating in her mind was that every summer, Saturday Night Live does come to Second City to look at the casts, and Lorne Michaels is not going to go to Tina's show. He's going to have to go to Tina's show. And she knew that Rachel would be there. So indeed, Lorne and his team come, and they see that show, and they hire Rachel. Tina did it. And she was making her partner look good, and she was focused on the other person, and she didn't have to do that. Another interesting note about Tina, and this is a thing we notice with sort of female executives in particular, is Tina has the ability to raise and lower her status at will. So you're not going to outstatus Lorne Michaels or Alec Baldwin. It's just not going to happen. So when she's with them, she can lower her status even if she's in charge of the show, and then she can raise it back up. And it's that ability to sort of shift, and rather than get into her head about it, she's able to just kind of do it. Okay, we're going to jump to questions in a moment, but I want to leave you with a couple different things. Charles Wyke is a really amazing academic, and he has a phrase that it lives with me. And his phrase is, you need to fight like you're right and listen like you're wrong. And this is the duality stuff. We tend to move our minds towards it's sort of one way or it's this way, when in fact, you can be powerful in the moment and fight for your ideas, and in the next moment realize you're full of shit. That's who we are. We're complicated human beings. We live in complicated times. And it's up to us to sort of recognize that we have this sort of shared humanity that doesn't stop when we walk into the office. So all the stuff that we learn and understand from our family dynamics and the books we read and the novels and all that is completely applicable to the work that we're doing inside our businesses. And I think it's getting better. People didn't talk about suffering at work before. They do it a bit now. And I know I'm very lucky to work in a theater where we have these kinds of conversations because that's, the thing. But we also have a business, and we're doctors who smoke. We don't do the yes and at times. We all do. But we have to let ourselves off the hook. We made a mistake. Call up that sort of resilience. And that's the thing that improvisation allows you to do. When you come up on stage and you fail over and over again, because that's what you do, you fail way more than you succeed. The analogy I give for this is if you have a performance review and someone comes in and says, I failed 70% of the time, wow, you kind of think that person's a failure. If you're a Major League Baseball player and you come in and say, hitting the bat, I fail 70% of the time, you're a 300 hitter. You're going for a title. So that's the thing we need to keep into mind, is that the mistakes are actually the starting point. It's the behavioral economics. We are irrational. Danny Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which is like the Bible to us, sees the world as a problem first. And that's not a negative. That's an opportunity. See all obstacles as gifts. All right, I think we can take some questions. I'll give you your mic.
Thank you. We've got another microphone in the back there, so if you could raise your hand if you got a question, we'll bring it around to you.
Happy to tell more celebrity stories. Yeah.
Oh.
Who do you want to hear about? Yeah, Tina's great. So Tina and Amy were best friends, and we actually didn't move quick enough on Amy before she moved to New York and did the Upright Citizens Brigade show. Here's the thing about Tina. She is actually a very kind person. However, she's a very righteous person. And so there's two things. She knows the thing about you that you hate about yourself. And if you're an asshole, she will use that to cut you down. So if I'm being a jerk or whatever, she will find the thing that I have the most shame about and use it. She is not afraid to do that. She's kind of amazing that way. I also work with Stephen Colbert. So Stephen was my wife's roommate at Northwestern in college. They lived in a house together for 2 years. So she got him his first job at Second City, which was selling T-shirts. And for 25 years, he held the record for most T-shirts sold. There was a little thing. It was like a sticky that was up. I didn't beat him. I sold T-shirts too. And Stephen was very interesting because the only reason he took classes at Second City is because when you work there, they're free. He wanted to be a dramatic actor. This is a good story. So the thing about Stephen, too, is he is incredibly thoughtful as a human being, which I think you can sort of figure out. We were creating a show in the 90s, and we had a scene called Spelling Bee. And this was early in the process. It was the funniest scene. It was for sure going to make the show. And the idea was that there was this two voices. Stephen was one of them who were off stage, and they were just it was a kid's spelling bee, and they were just torturing these children. So the one kid who was nervous, they'd give him words flop sweat or whatever. And then there was the girl with the brace around her mouth, and they gave her caramel apple. All right. And then the last one was Jackie Hoffman, Broadway actress now, and her name was Naomi Shapiro, and they would give her sort of vaguely anti-Semitic, prompts. Leading up to the very last one, which was your word to spell is compass. And she goes, can you use that in a sentence, please? And she goes, yeah, your people killed Jesus, compass. Right. So it got a big laugh or big groans, normally both. And Stephen comes into my office, and he's like, I don't want to do that scene anymore. And I'm like, it's the best scene in the show. And I go, it's getting amazing laughs. And he goes, yeah, but it's getting blood in the mouth laughs. And we had this long conversation about the role of a satirist, and was the role of a satirist to make sure every single person understood. And I said, you don't know that someone's not driving home and then figuring out what you were trying to say with that. And we ended up keeping the scene in the show. But I will never forget that moment, because then Stephen goes on to create the Colbert Report, where he is someone who is saying things he doesn't believe in over and over again. And I don't know if you guys know the studies about this, that basically conservatives thought he was making fun of liberals, and liberals thought he was making fun of conservatives. It was kind of evenly split. They did academic studies on this. And what's interesting about Stephen is that he didn't, while he is a political person, he's a much more political person now, for sure. But back then, he was much more interested in language and how people communicate. And that original character from the Colbert Report was really based on Noah Adams from NPR. That it was not Bill O'Reilly. It was like he found Noah Adams insufferable, and the way he communicated pompous, and that he was trying to play with that. And this whole idea around truthiness that came out early, it was all about language and about communication. And it's interesting, too, because I think when you boil down the problems that we've got in the workplace, like, when is it not a communication problem? It's always a communication problem. So if we understand that, we're going to then focus on, like, OK, how are we communicating? Where are we communicating? I work with Kim Scott, who wrote the book Radical Candor. I highly recommend it if you guys haven't checked it out. And Kim has this diagram around, she's a serial entrepreneur, a very successful person, but she talks about the ways that we don't speak honestly to each other, and that you want to have radical candor, but you can only do that if the person that you're speaking to understands that you love them and care for them. The other thing she talks about in the book on this grid, and this cut me to the core, is when you communicate with ruinous empathy. Ruinous empathy. You care so much, you're not going to say the truth. You care so much, you're not going to tell this person the thing they really need to know. And then where are you? I mean, how many of us, like, I live in this place. I have people who've worked for me for decades who I never could say the thing to. And that's a terrible place to be. On the other side of the grid is obnoxious aggression. So one of the things that Kim and I are working on, I host this podcast called Getting to Yes and on WGN Radio in Second City, and I'd interviewed her, and then we sort of got to chatting and flew her into Chicago, and we're looking at creating a module around radical candor, improvisation, but for gender conversations. So we're sort of like looking at this grid and saying, you know, and you guys have seen the science on this, that the diversity training doesn't work, right? All that data. And because we're trying to get people to not say the wrong thing when we're always going to say the wrong thing. So the place that we're trying to start at is, what do you do when someone says the wrong thing? How do you stay civil? You know, so let's concentrate on the person who says the wrong thing, the person who's the wrong thing is said to, and the bystander, the person who saw it. And let's give them some agency in some non-shame related ways to communicate. And I'm not talking about harassment or abuse, that's a different thing. This is normal, everyday gotcha moments. You know, but part of the reason this training doesn't work is people are walking in so scared. You know, what can I say? I'm going to say the wrong thing. I don't understand this gender pronoun thing. And I mean, it's hard. I get it. We've got to give people space to stay inside the difficult conversation.
So I think we have a question right
Yeah.
here in the middle.
I'm over here.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your 30-some-odd years with Second City, who's like an original person maybe in the first 10 years that you think would translate well to now, and why?
Well, the person I have the best relationship with, and the person who I think is sort of he thinks a lot about this work, is Alan Arkin. So Alan joined the first cast a few months in. He wasn't in the very first cast, but he came in, and he was lost. He thought his career was over, nothing was going right for him, and he literally believes that Second City saved him and that improvisation saved him. Because out of that, he got cast in, I think, Russians Are Coming, and then these strings of, you know, like The In-Laws, funniest movie ever. And then Arkin's career has been able to expand, and he is so thoughtful about the work, and he's been able to, you know, like Little Miss Sunshine, and and Argo, and all the stuff that he's kept this sort of career going. Obviously, Mike Nichols and Elaine May were also influential. They were never actually part of Second City, though they were part of that group. And I met Mike before he passed away. One of the things that's interesting about the work is that comedians rarely become funnier the older they get. There are some exceptions. But even Bill Murray, who we all know is hilarious, has really made his career doing more dramatic work now and finding sort of nuance. So it really is kind of this sort of young person's game, and you sort of adapt and change out of it. So it's interesting about seeing how individuals evolve and change as they go along. And I think about this, I can only speak for myself, but I remember, you know, when I stopped producing, I didn't have a game plan. I actually quit Second City, and my owner said, just hang out for a year, we'll figure something out. But I was like, total midlife crisis. And I was talking to Heather at the University of Chicago about this well into our thing, and she goes, you know there's data behind what you did. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And she's like, there's data that says that if you are an expert in a very particular area and you stay in that area, you become less happy and you don't invent. But if you can pivot and you take your expertise to a slightly different area, you have the ability to be happier and to shine. And literally, I am living proof of that happening. The last few years have been unbelievable with the ability to take everything I've understood and learned over time, apply it to this sort of new area, and working with all these sort of interesting people. And I think definitely from looking at the list of Second City alumni, the ones who have also been able to do that their career, find the way that they change and can adapt and grow and pivot, they're the ones who are the happiest. And the ones who just sort of like had that huge career and never could make the pivot are the ones who are the saddest. Or I don't want to leave on a sad note.
We've got one more got time for one
Give me
more
one more.
question.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Can you tell us or an example of your biggest failure, or maybe even Second City's biggest failure that turned into a gift?
Yeah, it's a million. It's going to be, there's so many failures. It is going to be hard to pick just one. So, you know, beyond me quitting and then like opening up this other thing, so that for me personally, that's probably it. Here's one. This is sort of a pivot on what you say, but it counts. So we have a thing called the Second City Holiday Party every year. All right, and what happens is the bar staff, so the box office, the night staff, they get to put on a show for us, for the main stage cast and for the executives, and they parody the scenes that were on the show, that are in the show that year, to then nail us. All right, and this one year, they chose to do a song that was in the show, but it was all about the fact that none of them had insurance. And literally, one of the waitresses, who was an actress that evening, walked down in front of our owner, Andrew Alexander, and says, "You have very expensive shoes, you wear very fancy jeans, why don't I have insurance?" Right to his face. Next to him is our general manager, Mike Conway, who was like, "Oh no, oh no." And the next day, Andrew called us into his office and said, "How do we get them insurance?" So this idea of building places where you can speak truth to power is huge. So we have a thing during the process very often, not every director does this, called Taboo Day. And the idea is when you're going to bring in an idea for the show that Second City will never allow to be on stage. It is too offensive, it is politically incorrect, it is too way out there. Invariably, like 5 of those ideas end up in the show. And so how do you do this as a business? Have a bad idea day. Have an idea day where everyone needs to bring in their absolute worst idea that will tank this business. We don't belong in this area, whatever. See what happens. Because when people take those chains off, really kind of cool stuff happens. And it's never going to be probably that one idea, but it might be a combination of ideas. And so that's in the essence of using failure and your mistakes. That's something that we do just like reflexively, and most people are running away from. So we need to close that gap. Thank you.